The Patchwork Foundation has instilled in me confidence, drive and determination to get involved in anything I'm truly passionate about.
Simply put, Patchwork has been family, diversity, new opportunities and personal growth.
It's a champion for underrepresented communities, and it's a champion for young people.
Being accepted unconditionally, regardless of your background, is part of what makes Patchwork truly special. A support network that have always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself.
It is a truly great organisation in helping younger people, students, graduates, often from minority backgrounds, to get into the professions.
Whether it's the prestigious MP of the Year Awards, the hugely successful masterclass programmes, or the question and answer sessions with leading politicians and civil servants, there's no denying that the Patchwork Foundation has made its mark at the very top of British politics.
Patchwork's important because it raises the awareness of politics amongst young people.
This is a truly extraordinary programme for these young people.
It is vital that young people from all backgrounds have influence in the political world.
Patchwork has allowed me to meet with key political figures who otherwise I would not be able to meet or engage with.
I've been to Parliament, number 10, spoken to special advisors.
I was able to go to the Lib Dem conference and see what kind of decisions are made in these big conferences.
I've done telephone banking and campaigned, and these are things I never thought I would ever do. Patchwork helped me to come out of my comfort zone.
It has honestly been one of the best decisions that I've made in my life.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us for the Patchwork Foundation's first Get Involved mayoral election session of the year, and in conversation with Shaun Bailey. My name is Sophia, and I'm the head of the Get Involved programme at the Patchwork Foundation. The Patchwork Foundation is a charity that aims to get underrepresented young people involved in politics. We do this by running several programmes, one of which is our Get Involved programme, which gives young people the chance to gain an insight into grassroots politics through canvassing, campaigning, and the party conference programme. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, rather than an in-person event, the Foundation is arranging a series of in-conversations with events with the main candidates for the London Mayoral elections. Shaun Bailey will be our first candidate to speak with us and share his vision for London. We recognise that as a result of COVID, a lot of young people do feel disillusioned, and that there is a need to reset that relationship between young people and elected officials. The London Mayoral elections are taking place on Thursday, May the 6th, and we do encourage you all to go out and vote. I would also like to thank our sponsor for tonight's session, Letter One, and also just to make everyone aware that this session is being recorded. And we do also encourage you to share this on social media via the hashtag #GetInvolved. We are also streaming live on YouTube and Facebook. I am now delighted to introduce the Conservative candidate for the London Mayoral elections, Shaun Bailey. Shaun Bailey has been a member of the London Assembly since 2016 and was also deputy leader of the Conservative GLA. He has also served as a special advisor on youth and crime under David Cameron's government, as well as being a community worker and an activist. Thank you for joining us tonight, Shaun. I know we're all looking forward to hearing from you. And just in terms of the evening structure, I would first like to invite you to share your vision for London and why you think that young people should be voting for you. We will then move on to the Q&A portion of the session for around 40 minutes, where our young people will be asking you questions based on topics such as employment, housing, and the environment. If you would like to ask him a question, please do use the hand raising feature. We do also have a number of pre-submitted questions as well, and the questions will be asked in groups of 3. We will then end the session with some closing remarks from you and a quick photo as well. So Shaun, if you would like to speak for around 10 minutes, please.
Thank you for having me. It's really great to be here. And before I give my own comments, watching the Patchwork film reminded me just how important your work is. Because I was born in London to a single parent family. My mum struggled to raise me and my brother. I'm dyslexic, so school was quite tough for me. So I had a lot of the things that denied me the networks that would normally someone would have to move on in the world. And the work you do is very, very important, because that confidence piece for an individual is very important, because it means Any opportunity you come across, you don't have that sort of imposter syndrome. You believe that you could do this if you tried. So the confidence is really big. And the network piece is important as well, because of course, that's where you build the confidence from. That's where the contacts come from. And watching the film just reminded me of a wonderful thing you do. And whatever happens to me going forward in the future, I will always reach out to Patchwork in any way I can to help, because to give a young person that start is incredible. And I go back to where I come from. So for those of you who don't know me, yes, I'm Shaun Bailey. I'm the Conservative candidate for Mayor of London. A real privilege to be this candidate. As I say, I came from a single parent home. My parents are from the Windrush generation. So we are, quite obviously, I'm the son of immigrants. And to traverse from being a dyslexic child in one of the poorest neighborhoods in London to then become the Conservative candidate for mayor is quite a journey. And looking at Patchwork and the people in the video, the young people in the video reminded me of my own journey, which is quite a pleasure. But what's the most important thing here is, how do we make this not extraordinary? How do you make the experiences I've had not extraordinary? Yes, Patchwork is one way, youth work is another. I was a youth worker for over 20 years and I ran a really big job club and I started my charity. We did a lot around crime prevention. And people often say to me, Shaun, why did you concentrate on crime? And I concentrated on crime because it had a devastating effect on our community. So many of the young people in my community were victims of crime and some carried it out. And when you're running for Mayor of London, you have to make decisions about where your emphasis is going to be. And particularly for young people, my emphasis has been on making the streets of London safe. Let's remember, in the last 4 years, we've seen a 60% rise in knife crime. In one weekend in February just gone, 17 people were stabbed, culminating in the death of my friend's son, Sven, his name was. He's 22 years old. He went to buy a bagel and orange juice and he was stabbed to death. His mum's never seen him since. And that's an incredibly horrific thing to happen on the streets of London. Our own Sadiq Khan said that the streets of London are not safe for women and girls, which is a huge failure, which is something I will be putting right. But the whole point is, the first part for any community, particularly communities that are struggling socially, to make sure that they're safe physically. A young man in Croydon said to me, he's doing very well in school. And he said to me, unfortunately, Shaun, I'm having to spend more time now concentrating on my safety than my school, which I just was devastating to me. And that's a motivation there. But look, I want to concentrate on the positive things of London, what we can do. At our very best, London is a city full of opportunity, full of work, full of joy, full of family. But currently, we're not living up to that reputation. We've had a few things fall down along the way. And the first thing, of course, is opportunities for young people. So there's two very important things I'll be doing. Firstly, I'll be making sure that I start a second chance fund. There's a lot of young people whose lives haven't gone quite the direction they'd like them to go into. They've got involved maybe in some offending. I want to break that reoffending cycle. So what I will be doing is setting up a fund that's dedicated to helping them get the training and the support they need to move on in their lives. Really important. I'll also be starting 4,000 new youth workers across London to help young people, much younger young people, start to look at where they want to go in the future, stay safe now, and develop the social skills that are useful. And I think that's the part of my program that can really connect to Patchwork, to start to feed people into Patchwork as they grow older. The other thing we need to do as well, and this goes beyond young people, but it's focused on young people. I have a plan to generate 925 to 924,000 jobs over a 5-year period. And why that's very important, for young people to have a future, there has to be an economy for them to have a future in. And I think this is a big part of that. And I want to make sure that we develop that future for young people by having that job. But the other thing is, I always have to keep an eye on the challenges facing London. So knife crime is at historic highs. Good homes in London are very unaffordable. The transport network is expensive and it's struggling to cope in normal times. We don't have COVID ridership. So what I want to do is twofold. Firstly, I want to build 100,000 homes for £100,000 each using a shared ownership model. That means young people can afford to live in London. They can afford to buy in London. They can afford to stay. And this is very important because what drives rent in London is a lack of property and also a lack of property to buy. There's many young people who'd like to move on and buy. And what that will do is mean that the rental market will be less congested and that will hold down rents. Also as well, as someone who was homeless all the way through his 20s, I know the power of social housing. So I'll be spending over £1.3 billion making sure we build homes for social rent as well. Because there's a large part of our London communities who don't want to own or can't own, and we need to provide housing for them as well. It's very important. The other piece, of course, is to make sure that as we go forward and recover from COVID, we repair TfL's finances. TfL was bankrupt before COVID. Indeed, the mayor had received the biggest single bailout of any institution in this country. So I want to make sure I build a London infrastructure bank that will give us £10.9 billion to spend on infrastructure of TfL and other things in London. London works because it is a footfall city, and we need people to be able to move around cheaply, quickly, and efficiently. Because it is no longer good enough to run the system, any of our London systems, in the way we have been for the last 5 years. Young people haven't been able to move forward. In fact, many communities have been held back, and I want to answer that. But the key thing here as well is my plan for a fresh start for London includes the voice of young people. It includes giving young people very clear steps as to what they can do next in their development as they grow older in London. I remember in my 20 years of youth work, the question that was regularly asked was, how can I, Shaun? How can I do this next thing? Young people often knew what they wanted to do, but they didn't know how to do it. And that's the process that I want to help young people with. How do they get onto the housing ladder? How do they get employed? How do they get into university? These are all things I can support from City Hall. And my Fresh Start model is really focused on helping young people do that as well. But what's important here is to answer your questions. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to bring my my opening remarks to a conclusion, because I'm really interested in answering the questions you have. But I will say this to you as well as a slight challenge. Be wary of politicians talking about giving things to young people. Beware of people saying that they can just give you things and the world will be very different to you than it has been for young generations before you. The young people who are the most successful are the young people who understand that they'll have to work at it. The politicians who are truthful are the politicians who give you the opportunity to do that work. So when people talk to you about rent controls, you should point out to them only one generation benefits from your rent control, and it'll be the generation ahead of you, not you. That's why you don't hear me talking about rent controls. When you hear people talking about how much they've spent on young people, ask them what was the outcome. One of the biggest wastes of money in London has been, we had a jobs program started by the mayor. He spent £70 million on that program, and it only generated 109 jobs. You'd been better off just giving the people the money. They'd have made many more jobs from it. The point I'm trying to make, as a young person going forward in the world, make sure you understand the realities and the complexities of being successful, because what that will do is stand you much better stead, and it means you'll be able to stop people when they're pulling the wool over your eyes by offering you nice things that are never going to materialize. But I always think if you can inspire a young person, they always outperform your expectations of them. And I will be running a City Hall that's full of inspiration and full of the right policies to help young people move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Shaun, for that. I think we're going, just before we move on to the open Q&A, we do have a poll, a couple of questions for you guys to answer. It'd be interesting to hear your answers on that. And then I think if we're going to go to our first question, the first question is by Lisa, please.
Hi, thanks, Safia.
Hi.
And thanks, Shaun, for your opening comments. My name's Lisa, and I have this question for you today. So young people's trust in elected officials is at an all-time low at the moment. How would you work, to build that trust again?
Thank you for the question, Lisa, and I fully understand it. I was a youth worker for 20 years, and what was very important was I ran everything. I was in charge. And in the beginning, I would say, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. What increased the respect for me amongst young people is when I involved them in the decisions. So I would literally say, here's our budget for the month, the week, the year, for the trip, for the course we want to set up, for the project we want to do. How do you want to spend that money? And I was always very realistic with young people about the real costs, the kind of influence they could have, and what may be the outcomes as far as my experience had shown me. And that's the point I want to make. I will build a City Hall that will have young people in the very heart of it. I'm going to have a deputy mayor for young people who will be a young person, to make sure that it's not just what I think young people want or I feel, it's what young people are actually saying. And the reason I want to base that person in my office is so that I can send them out regularly to convene with people like Patchwork, to convene with some of the homeless charities that specialize in helping young people out, just to understand the challenge that young people have. I think if you can have a voice at the table who is young, who actually has the power to make some changes, then you can get some changes. But the other thing I think as well is to be truthful. You will get all kinds of politicians promising you all kinds of things that you will never see. I'm always very careful to be challenging to young people about what they want so that they can see I'm actually trying to develop a real program to deliver it. It's very key. You know, young people now in London are not the only people who feel let down about the last 5 years in London. We're made an awful lot of promises, and sometimes it looks like people didn't even try to fulfill them. And I want to move away from that. I'm not some slick card-carrying politician. I've often said the right thing in maybe the wrong way, but what I do is deliver. I always deliver. Delivering for young people, I think, is important because it's our future. And I think you need to bring young people into the decision process to make sure you can honour their needs.
Thank you for that. It's really interesting to see how you're going to be bringing young people into the decision making. And just before we move on to the open Q&A, I do encourage you all to raise your hand so you can ask a question. We do have our second poll question as well for you guys. Okay, so if we just move on to a second question from Toby, please.
Hi, Shaun. My question relates more to the issue of institutional racism in the UK and in wider society. Obviously, the race report was published very recently, but I haven't heard much about what you have to say about it. And I just feel like I haven't heard you say much about racism and the institutional racism experienced by many Black people in the UK. So I just wanted to sort of get your views and what you think about the race report.
So there's two things, Toby. I think the race report was dealt with on people by the left in a very political way. And what you haven't heard me do is wade into the politics. I think it's a waste of people's time. You know, I have 2 Black children at home and I've watched political arguments that don't seem like they're going to advance their chances in the world at all. Toby, I am old enough to know that institutional racism has been around a long time in this country and it is still here. Look, where I grew up, there was a NF office and people used to chase us up and down the road. You know, you need to get chased by people. I'm just about old enough to remember no dogs, no Irish, no Blacks. So the institutional racialism is there, of course. Remember, I'm a youth worker. The amount of interactions I've had with the police have been tough as well over the years. Not all negative by any means, but there's been enough to make me aware. So when people say to you institutional racism exists, okay, fine, we know that. They're not telling us anything we don't know. What are they going to do about it? And that's the question that I would answer. It's 2 things. Firstly, institutional racism is a lazy term, because much of the good or bad time you have, Toby, will be determined by the individuals you come across. So, you know, no institution in this country now has racism written into its constitution, but some individuals in that institution will treat you in a racist way. And if we say it's just the institution, they get to excuse their behavior. So it's institutional racism and also the personal responsibility not to be racist as well. And of course, if you're building an organization like I'm building, you want to build one that's deliberately anti-racist. So they're the 3 elements: institutional racism, anti-racism as an organization, and then the individual responsibility around racism. Another thing about the race report, people who've attacked it, none of them have talked about the recommendations of the report. Now, another report, okay, it's another report. Does it come from a different angle? Yes, and I'll come back to the angle in a second. But the thing is, there's recommendations in there that I think will make a fundamental difference to the outcomes for the Black community across this country. Things like extended workday. School day, not workday. The reason the Patchwork Foundation, for instance, is so powerful is because it's developing people's social and educational skills and building a network. The rung below that is to make sure that Black children in particular do very well in education best we can, because it gives us something to sell in the job market, it builds our confidence, and it means that people can't tell us that we're not trying and that they couldn't employ us because we don't have the skills. And I think that's the kind of thing that attaches to the kind of work that Patchwork are trying to do. And that's very, very important. And that's why you hear me talking about what are we going to do? Because unfortunately, sometimes the conversation around racism has been about punishing other people, but I don't feel like that makes us move forward. I'm much more interested in a conversation that acknowledges the racism, okay, has a plan to deal with it, brings people on board, and then says what we want at the end. You know, where are we going to this? If we continue to punish people, they just won't engage with us, and the situation will never get solved. And the last thing I'll say, we have to acknowledge some of the progress that's made. I already told you when I was younger, we used to have to physically run away from the NF. That's ridiculous. People don't do things like that right now, thankfully. But I'm not underplaying some of the issues the Black community faces. Whenever I speak to young people, it reminds me that Black graduates are half as likely to be employed as their white counterparts. That's an issue for us, a real issue for us. And that's something we need to get on top of. But we also do need to accept that there's been some progress. Because if we don't, what have our parents and our grandparents been fighting for? What are we doing there if we don't acknowledge some of the wins we've had, as well as the journey we still have yet to go on?
Thank you, Shaun. So we're just going to go to our next set of questions from Vulcan, Tess, and Asama, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
First of all, Shaun, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Vulcan Ganadagli. I'm the future candidate of Hackney Youth Parliament. Okay. I want to ask this question. How would you tackle knife crime?
I mean, that's the big question, isn't it? I think the biggest failing we've seen in London is the inability of the mayor to get on top of knife crime. And I'll tell you this because this is important. He said it will take 10 years to solve knife crime. We don't have 10 years. We need to solve it right now. I was speaking to one of the boys I know from back, I come from Lavender Grove, from West London. And his younger brother said to me, Shaun, we live with murderers in our midst. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be hard to convince people not to carry their own weapon when everybody else has a weapon and we think there's murderers here, right? And that notion is why we've lost 5 years to deal with that. And that's a very important start point. So there's 3 ways that you look at dealing with knife crime. At one end, there's enforcement. So you talk about extra police officers, you talk about scan and search technology. You're talking about going into communities, working with those communities and doing some stop and search and taking those weapons off the streets. You're talking about knife bins in our 50 most violent wards. That's one end. In the middle, we've got to help those young people who got caught up in stuff that a lot of the time they don't really want to get caught up in, but they haven't got an exit. So what we need to do is spend the money from City Hall, I'm calling it a second chance fund, to give those young people the support they need to get back into training, into college, work preparedness, whatever it is, A-levels, whatever it is, to give them an opportunity that they can move forward with, so they can get into work, they can get into training, whatever, construction academy, whatever it is. But we must break that cycle of reoffending. I don't know what part of London you're from, but everywhere you go, you meet a certain group of usually boys, a bad man, quite frankly, and we need to break that. Yeah, we need to break that, because if we don't, they out of survival, people start to join them, because it's either you're with them or against them, and if you're against them, you're in trouble. So we want to break that. But the third piece, the piece that I'm most excited about, because it's where I come from, I'm going to spend £450 million over 3 years on youth work in London, giving young people places to be, things to learn, supporting the organisations that support them to go on and avoid this kind of crime. Because ultimately, we need to give young people a resilience to being pulled in. Because the amount of young people I know who've been involved in some, quite frankly, madness, who didn't really want to be there, but they were just around it and got sucked in. We need to make sure that we can keep our younger people out of that. And that means giving them places to be, giving them youth workers to work with, and supporting the organisations that support them.
Thank you, Shaun. I appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Great. Hi, Shaun. Thank you so much for being here today. My name's Tess, and my question is, online abuse on social media has very obviously reached an all-time high, with women and people of colour most targeted, and especially those who are engaged in political life. How do you propose to use your position as Mayor of London to make effective and lasting change in that area?
I think there's 2 things I'd say. Firstly, is about me as an individual. Boy, I cannot tell you what experience that I have of that. I've had white people abuse me, black people, everybody abusing me, and often with no real reason or logic to what they're saying. So the first thing is for me personally not to give in, for me to stay involved. I remember I received a massive string of abuse because my wife is white. You know, it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And I remember saying, someone telling me it's fine. I'm saying, but it's not fine. My children are mixed race. You're mixed race. How can you tell me this is fine? Of course, it's not fine. It isn't fine. So my first thing is not to relent, not to give in. Because if we start to give in, we let them in. The second piece is to make sure I continue to fund, in fact, increase the funding for the police online activity. So the police do a lot of stuff around shutting down radicalist websites, shutting down people who are making threatening behavior and all the rest of that. That hate crime element of policing, I will continue to fund. When it comes to women and girls in particular, I'm going to provide 1,000 extra officers to make the safeguarding unit bigger. So not only can they find and prosecute these people, they can also do the preventative work in the background. Anything from dealing with domestic violence to the fact that the Mayor of London said the streets are no longer safe for women and girls. That is wrong, and somebody needs to do something about that, and I will. It's 1,000 extra dedicated officers just for that, as well as a general police activity. But there's a deeper thing we can do as well. I still don't think that the IPs and IP providers, and also some of the big apps, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, I still don't think they do enough work to take this material down. And I'll give an example. A very, very long time ago now, I'm talking 15 odd years ago, a group of boys I was working with posted a video that caused absolute dramas. I don't need to tell you the whole, yeah, come, we're looking for you, where bad man will bore you up, wait till we see you on road. They did that on video, and obviously the other group of boys responded anyway. The stabbings and the madness off the back of that were, they were shocking. Anyway, I was speaking to a group of young people I'm working with now, and one of them said to me, it can't be that bad. And then another one said, let's try to find the video. And unbelievably, 15 years later, they found the video actually quite easily. And that makes me know that these companies are not working hard enough to get this abuse offline. They're not working hard enough to keep us safe. So as well as increasing the police activity around it, I think I'll increase the lobbying activity around it to get the government to change the law to speed them up. Now, the companies aren't always bad. They often want to help. I think we'll be seeking expertise of young people to speed up and improve the way in which they do help.
Thank you. We're just going to go to our next set of questions from Osama, Yash and Jasmine, please.
Good evening, Shaun. Thank you for your time and for clarifying your positions as a candidate for Mayor of London. We appreciate it. My question is around one of your flagship, is on one of your flagship policies, which is 100,000 homes sold at £100,000. So I'm of the age where I'm starting to think about getting on the housing ladder, but it just seems impossible really, because the deposits are just so much, and you know, there's like a shortage of affordable housing. And so could you clarify your policy, and what more can a Mayor of London do to help young people like me who are trying to get onto the housing ladder? Because it just seems impossible, or not impossible, but like just very difficult. And I'm at the point where I'm starting to, you know, feel really skeptical that I would ever get on it.
Listen, I know a number of young people who tell you it's impossible. I tell you where I'm coming from in this. All through my 20s, I was homeless. I sofa surfed, I had to wait for people to put me up. I house sat. I remember one night sitting on a 220 bus, and I remember the 220 bus because I used to get it to school, so I knew the route. So I sat on there because I knew, well, when it gets to Tooting, I'll at least know where I am. So I got on the bus and I was waiting for someone to phone and sort me out. Fortunately for me, they did. But what that situation makes me think of, I had a job at the time, you know what I mean? And yet I was still homeless. It was crazy because I couldn't afford the rent. So let me tell you what I'm going to do. When I tell you that I'm going to build 100,000 homes for £100,000 each using shared ownership, I'm doing it for specific reasons. It's to help young people who want to move on out of rented accommodation. It's to help young people own in London, because London needs that. Many young people will only stay in London if they can own and avoid mad rent. They'll only stay in London if they have a future, and this house will be part of it. So here's what we do. When I provide us 100,000 homes for £105, it means the deposit would be £5,000 to get in that home. Currently, the average London deposit is £109,000. So I'm trying my best to wipe out as much as I can of that deposit. I've got it down to £5,000. That's the first piece. It means that you could then buy 10%, 20%, 30% of that home. But why it's important, it would always be cheaper than renting the equivalent property, and you'd be building equity in that home. That's the key piece. Secondly, imagine for a second I could get you away from a dodgy landlord. You wouldn't be having to deal with a landlord. In most cases, I would be the landlord as Mayor of London, if you see what I mean. And that's the situation I want to put young people in. And it's affordable because the government has given us over £4 billion to subsidise this. So I'll get that done. But what I'll also do, there's £1.3 billion I'm going to spend on purely social rent homes, because there's some people who never be able to afford to buy even at that low level. There's some people who just won't want to for lots of different reasons. So I need to provide that housing as well. And as someone who came from council housing, I understand the power of it. But why I've done 100,000 homes for £100,000 is because it's realistic. It can be delivered, because I fully understand what it's like for people to promise you homes. I remember when Sadiq Khan was running for mayor, he promised us 80,000 homes per year, but his tactic was wrong. And it's meant that he hasn't even been able to build 40,000 homes in 5 years. And that's because he went after developers to support him and they wouldn't do it. What I'm going to do, I'm going to become a developer by setting up Housing for London in City Hall, owned and backed by City Hall, public money, with one goal: to deliver affordable housing for people in London. And I want to be clear, this is deliberately focused on young people, so that young people can come and stay in London, and you can build your future in London, because that's good for London as well.
Thank you.
Jasmine, we can come to you next for your question, please.
Hi, Shaun. Hello, everyone. Good evening. I'm Jasmine Jada George. I'm a member of London Youth Assembly and Havering Youth Council. And my question to you is, if you get elected as mayor, will you diverse the curriculum? If so, how?
Will I what the curriculum, sorry?
Will you diverse the curriculum? If so, how?
The thing I say to you, if any mayoral candidate tells you they'll diverse the curriculum, they're 100% lying. The school curriculum, of course, is controlled by the school and by the Department for Education. So you couldn't do that. If you're asking me, will I campaign to get the education, the curriculum diversified? Yes, I would. I'm a governor of a school, and one of the proudest boasts of the schools that I've been governor in is that they diversify as far as they can. They listen, for instance, to the histories of the children who make up that school and find ways of inculcating that into the history that's being taught, into the subjects that's being taught. It's very important. And there's two ways I would like to see the curriculum diversified. One is to reflect more accurately the makeup of British history and the tapestry that has been. So, for instance, my parents are Jamaican. The Jamaican relationship with British history goes back far longer than you'd ever learn in school. But the other piece as well is an education that gives people from our communities, and I make an assumption here, from poorer communities, from ethnic communities, a much better grounding to move forward. So, for instance, financial training. I used to be special advisor to the Prime Minister, and I worked very hard to get PFEG, which is a money training organisation, a charity, into schools, into the national curriculum, so that we learn the skills. That if I said to you what is compound interest, if I said to you, how and where do you get a mortgage from? If I said to you, the dividend that your pension might return, all of these things are important to developing communities so that we get the maximum benefit from whatever's being offered by the government, and of course, any job we have. So diversifying of the curriculum for me is not just about how do we talk about history. That's one element. I'm also interested in how do we talk about our future as well. We need to make sure that our community has access to capital and also understands how to maximize that capital.
Thank you, Shaun. I do have a question from Abby as well. Abby is asking, TfL has become extortionately expensive for Londoners, with the congestion charge, all but making commute by a car into London practically impossible during social hours. How will you tackle this issue?
Look, I'm very famous for saying the expansion to the congestion charge was a decision that the mayor made. He admitted it himself on GMTV. I simply wouldn't have done it. I think as we recover from COVID and we're trying to protect the jobs of young people, and remember, London has the highest rate of unemployment across the country. Most of the people who've lost their jobs are young people. The reason young people have lost their jobs because they're often working in our entertainment sector. And by expanding the congestion charge, the mayor has absolutely devastated that sector. Just 2 weeks ago, I was with the Bangladeshi Caterers Association, and they've got thousands of members and run thousands of restaurants across London. They were saying the congestion charge alone has diminished their business immeasurably, and they're having to lay people off. So by removing the additions to the congestion charge, now it's gone to 7 days a week and it's £15 a time. By bringing it back to £11 and by making it only 5 days a week, I hope to get more customers back to improve employment in London. And when people talk to you about the expansion of the ultra low emission zone, they've got to remember by expanding that zone, you're cutting communities in half. You're separating communities from their hospitals, from their schools, from their parents, from their church, their gurdwara, their mosque, their synagogue, their temple. And the mayor hasn't taken into account the social effect that will have. And why that's important as well, it won't actually help improve air quality either. If you want to improve air quality in London, what you should do, what I'm going to do, is make all of the buses zero emissions. That's the equivalent of taking 1.1 million cars from the roads of London. That's how you improve the air quality, not by taking money out of people's wallets. Because if you take money out of people's wallets, what it does, it means that then that money is taken away from young people in the form of them losing their jobs. That's what happens. And I'm very desperate to protect the employment of young people, because as you get on the road of work and jobs, it improves your prospects so you get experience, and we mustn't rob young people of that opportunity.
Thank you for that. So we're coming to our next set of questions from Yash and David, please.
Hello, Shaun. My name's Yash Soni. I'm currently a youth councillor within the London Borough of Barking and Dagenham Youth Council. And the London Borough of Barking and Dagenham is a borough that is backward in terms of opportunity and facilities for students and people who are in university and so on and so forth. I want to know what you do to ensure that there is an equality of opportunity, as well as making the education standard up to scratch for every single person in every single London borough, not just people who live in Kensington, Chelsea, and people who live in places like I do in East London.
So I am a fellow East Londoner. I live in Romford. So I understand the notion that other parts of London get much more support than maybe the east of London where we are. I think there's two things. Firstly, I don't think City Hall, the mayor, has done enough to use his own portal, his own convening powers to bring communities together. And I want to be very clear about the communities I'm talking about. I'm not talking our community, I'm talking about the community that lives in the centre of London, the business community. There's a lot of opportunity there, there's a lot of expertise there, there's a lot of support there that they could be building to help communities around them. That's the kind of forum I'll be creating by having a deputy mayor for business and a deputy mayor for young people, so we can bring those two sets of communities together to trade in experience and to trade in opportunities as well. Also, as Mayor of London, I'm going to set up a portal for parents. And it's important that we have parents of young children understand how the education system works, where they can get extra support, materials to push their children if their children are doing well, materials to help them if they're not doing so well, and how we can help them progress more easily. I think often in education, we talk about education as if the mayor can fix it. He can't. But what he can do is provide support to other people fixing it, which includes, with my 4,000 youth workers, a number of them will be working in organisations that have supplementary schools, etc., etc. And that will be a way of me supporting the cost of that school to increase the scope of that school so they can go out and do more work as well. I think that's very important. But ultimately, what we have to do for young people is make sure they have access to decent training. And the way in which the apprenticeship scheme works, I will have tweaked, because not enough small businesses use it because there's too much red tape. I think that needs to go. And I'll take the government on and getting that change. It needs to be changed at government level. And what I really want to do across London is get all of these companies to reach out and get young people from different places. Expect they do too much of the usual suspects, straight to university, straight from Oxford or whatever. Let's talk about the talent that we have locally. Why don't they train the talent to the same level that they're just buying in? I think if you get local people and train them up, they give you more loyalty anyway. And that's something that I'll be asking business to do more and more and more, particularly if they want to get any kind of contracting out of City Hall.
Thank you, Shaun.
Hi, Shaun. Thanks for joining us
today. Apologies about the camera. I'm having some technical difficulties, unfortunately. So, so my name is David Kennedy. I'm currently working at HSBC in my placement year during my university studies. My question is, if you are elected mayor, how are you going to ensure that London continues to attract investment and jobs, especially in the professional and financial services sector, which is obviously very important for London's economy, given the uncertainty currently around the Brexit deal and COVID?
You're completely right that the financial sector is our biggest single sector actually by some way. So here's the things we do. You'll have candidates tell you that they were against Brexit and what a drama it was and this, that, and the other. That all may be true, but the point is this has happened and the country voted for Brexit. So what we need to do is maximize the opportunity. And there's a number of ways of looking at it. I've been speaking to the Secretary of State for International Trade, Liz Truss. She has signed 62 bilateral trade agreements. She's currently working on a trade agreement that if she can get it signed, it would be the biggest trading group in the world. It'd certainly be bigger than when we were in Europe if we were in this new group. The reason I say that is because that's how we attract in new trade, by doing all these bilateral trade agreements, because that is the way that the world trade is going anyway. The other piece to look at as well, the natural advantages that London had before Brexit still exist. The language you use, the time zone we're in, our legal system and our ecosystem. We just need to get out into the world, remind the world that it still exists and sell our wares. So to that end, I'll have a deputy mayor, not only for business, but also one for international trade. I will lead a number of trade delegations across the world. I've already spoken to the Bangladeshi High Commissioner, the Pakistani High Commissioner, the Indian High Commissioner. I've spoken to the deputy mayor of Jerusalem. One more. Oh, I've been speaking to the Italian ambassador as well, and about making international trade agreements with them, about making, trade delegations with them to swap trade, to build business, to get business out there internationally. And the reason I'll be having a deputy mayor for international trade is to make sure that is done all day, every day. We bang the gong for London. We currently don't have one now, and that's why I'll have one then, because I think London's future is as its past, international. We have been a magnet for inward investment, and the only way to keep that going is to show that we're open. But let's be clear, this is an opportunity for us. I was speaking to the Indian ambassador, High Commissioner, and she was talking about how pleased India is with this special agreement we now have to welcome Indian students over there. It's a special visa, they come in very quickly, they do their studies, they can stay for 2 years after, etc., etc. I've been speaking to Hong Kong people, BNOs called, British nationals abroad, that can come here if they want to study, start a business, get it going. This international outreach is something that would have been impossible if we were part of the EU. But I think it's something that from City Hall, I really want to push, because if you wanted to stay or leave, the fact is we have left. So let's maximize that situation. There's no doubt in my mind, though, and I will not downplay the challenge that it will be to make sure we get a deal for financial services. And my deputy mayor for business will spend all day, every day, making sure the government do the right thing by London business. That's something that I'll be pursuing very, very urgent.
Thanks for that, Shaun. Impressive answer.
Okay, we'll now be moving on to our final set of questions from Tolu and Jasmine, please.
Hi, Shaun, thank you so much for coming to speak to us. I'm an analyst at Goldman Sachs, and I also am a young conservative from Havering. So I wanted to ask, to what extent do you think that the cuts in the police force, for example, since 2010, we know that there's been a decrease of 20,000 police officers in London, and also a lot of youth centres have closed down. To what extent do you think that contributed to crime? And do you think that your pledge to increase the amount of police to 8,000 is enough to compensate for the cuts that have been made?
Okay, let me separate out those two things. And also, before I answer them, I'm also a conservative from Havering. I don't know if I'm young. That'll probably be stretching it, but I'm definitely a conservative from Havering. Look, let me start by saying this. Yes, there was a cut in the police service, and particularly Sadiq Khan will come and sit here and tell you that cuts have consequences. But then ask him the question, why did he take £38 million out of the police staffing budget as his first act for Mayor in London? He then went on to massively increase the cost of his own office. So he filled these offices with press officers while he took away police officers from the streets of London. I do think it had an effect, actually. because it is a scientific fact that the presence of the police pushes crime down. So that's why I'm pledging to do two important things immediately. Firstly, to reopen the 38 police station closed by Sadiq Khan. I think local communities want to have a relationship.
Was it Sadiq that that was in charge of cutting the police officers and the stations, or was it the Conservative government?
It's complicated. So initially, the cuts came from the government, but since in the last 5 years, the additional cut came from the Mayor of London because he had the budget. So the long story is the outgoing mayor left him the budget to pay for police. He took £38 million out of that budget, put it in his own office, and then spent it on press officers. So we had a record low number of police, something that Sadiq Khan could have stopped. That's a decision he made. He then went on to cut the 38 police counters because he said people didn't use them. But people didn't use them because under the former mayor, there was much lower crime. Under Sadiq Khan, as crime went up, people were begging to have those stations opened again because they wanted to have a relationship with their local police station because there's so much crime. So that's the situation we're in now. I have pledged to put 8,000 extra police officers on the street because the government will cover the vast cost of that, but I will make savings in City Hall, lowering the cost of Sadiq Khan's office, to give us an additional 3,000 officers, because I believe that's the number of police officers that London needs to cover its growing population. Remember, we've had a 60% rise in knife crime and 87% rise in robbery. The Mayor of London has said that the streets of London are no longer safe for women and girls. We've had a 43% rise in sexual attacks on the underground network. We have to get on top of that. So not only will I get 1,000 extra officers, 8,000 extra officers, I'll make 1,000 officers dedicated to the safety of women and girls on the streets of London. I'm also going to make sure I grow the size of the hate crime unit as well, so we get on top of those things. I'm going to have a burglary firing squad to get rid of all of the backlog of burglaries. But the reason I'm doing this is to send a message to criminals that you will be caught if you commit crime in London. The biggest driver behind crime are twofold. One is drugs, and the second is criminals going uncaught, because obviously they just keep going and it encourages other people to get involved in criminal activity as well. That's why I'll be doing that. That's the criminal element. The other element as well, of course, I will be putting 4,000 youth workers also on the streets of London. We can't just arrest our way out of this problem. We need to support people to do the right thing as well. But ultimately, what will help London is my plan to generate 924,000 jobs over 5 years. Poor communities need an income. This protects a community in many different ways, and that's why I want to do that. There's no silver bullet to solving crime, but a good income in every community is a very, very big step in the right direction.
Okay, thank you.
Will you get young people involved in the decisions you make? If so, how?
I definitely will get young people involved in decisions, because I remember being a youth worker. I used to come in the morning, I'd have all my clever ideas, and then one of the young people just dismantle it in 2 minutes. And the reason they'll dismantle it is because they were going through things that I am no longer going through. Like, I was homeless for a long time, and I almost tried to shut that down in myself because of the terror it caused. But of course, when I'm dealing with young people who are homeless, they're bringing it back to me straight away. Sean, you need to do this. Why are we doing that? That's a waste of the money. You said we could do this with a budget. And I welcome that process of scrutiny. I welcome that process of creativity. Young people have a very, very special quality. And I'm not just saying this because you're all young, but young people have a very, very special quality. You're not encumbered by history. As you get older, you start to think, well, it hasn't been done like that before, or we can't do it because of this. Young people don't have that problem. They're just looking at the result. And often when someone chats to you in that manner, you start thinking, you know what? They're probably right. Let's get on and do it. So the way to do it is threefold. I've already told you I'll have a deputy mayor for young people, right? And that will be a young person. That's a key thing. So they will build an agenda using all the youth parliaments across London, using the London Assembly Youth Parliament as well. They'll build an agenda of questions and topics of budget desires that they'll bring to me, and I'll give them the power to have that conversation regularly. That's the first thing. The second thing, of course, pertains to the police. The people that the police have the poorest relationship is with young people. I'll be setting up a forum to make sure that the police are regularly confronted by young people so they can both tell their story. I will have an office for community policing, and that office will have a number, not one, a number of young representatives in it to make sure that the different messages from different young communities across London are being fed into that conversation, and the police are being held to account by the people they're encountering most, not some old people who've forgotten what it's like to get stopped and searched every 2 minutes, by people actually going through it, by people who are afraid because they have people in their environment who are after them. The police need to hear those stories. People who've come out of jail and a little bit lost. The police, the authorities need to hear those stories. So I'll have that in there as well. But ultimately, it's about culture. It's about, did you ever bother to listen to young people ever? Fortunately for me, I come from a youth work background. My entire professional career has been listening to young people. Most of the good stuff I have done has been an idea that was given to me by a young person. I would never cut myself off from that pool of great ideas. Why would I? I think you get more done if you involve more people in the conversations that you have.
Thank you for answering my question.
Pleasure.
Thank you. And we've just got time for one quick final question from Yash, please.
Hi, Shaun. Me again. Now more than ever, young people, because of COVID and other kind of situations that have gone on in the past year or so, they are struggling with their mental health, their physical well-being. What will you be doing to help young people get past this hurdle and look forward to a brighter and better future?
I cannot tell you how spot on you are with that. You don't need to hear that from me. But I've got 2 children, one's 11, one's 14, and I've watched even those youngsters struggle with their mental health, not being around their friends, not being in school, in the house the whole time. I think here's the concept I want to get across about mental health. I think in this country we don't talk enough about mental well-being. What we should be doing is giving people the training to look after their own mental health and the mental health of the people around them, friends, family, community. First and foremost, the training exists. I used to sit on the board of a hospital, and I've seen the training. It exists. It's very good. Mind, the mental health charity, they do the training as well, called Mental Health Triage. I will be facilitating that across London. I'll have it on my own portal in City Hall. I'll fund groups to go out into schools, into community environments to do that. I'll use my 4,000 youth workers to do that as well, because defending our mental health is the first step. That will lower the amount of people suffering from poor mental health. The other piece is to take on the government to make sure that CAMS gets a bigger and bigger profile, and by that I mean more and more funding, because in London we could do a much stronger CAMS network, and I'll support that as well. And also giving young people the time and the space to come forward and talk about their own mental health. You know, some of the stigma, particularly if you come from one of a community like mine, people often hide mental health. We need to get it out there so that it isn't feel pressured. And the last thing I'll say about, if you know anyone suffering from mental health issue, even if you think you can't deal with it yourself, that's fair enough because it's a big deal. Get them to seek help. The first thing we have to do is get everybody an idea that if you have poor mental health, if you're struggling, there's no shame, let's seek help. And I will trumpet that message long and hard. One of the most troubling but moving things I've ever done, I did some work with a friend of mine from my youth work days around suicide. And it was, on one end, it was so sad, but on another end, it was really great to see people seeking help. And to find out, I'm going back probably 8 years now, no, probably, in fact, 5 years, because when I became a London Assembly member, to find out that the biggest killer of men under 45 was suicide was incredible. It was a shock to me. And it shows you that mental health is really real. And I spoke to a young girl the other day who talked about being sexually harassed the whole time and the effect that had on her mental health. That's why you always see me looping around to things like protecting people's safety on the streets, breaking down gangs and gang membership, because that drives poor mental health in areas, getting people away from that carousel of going in and out of jail. All of these things damage people's mental health, and that's why I'm focused on making public safety in the broadest sense better in London, because I think it reduces the mental health stress in London, and it gives us the ability to help people get better.
Thank you, Shaun.
Thank you for that, Shaun. So that has come to the end of our Q&A session. We're just going to move on quickly to have a quick screen grab. If everyone would like to put their camera on as well for that, we'd really appreciate that. If you're not, just take your camera off as well. And then after that, I'd invite you to just do some closing remarks for us, Shaun, please.
Did you take your screen, Gareth?
Yeah, I think Esther has taken that.
Yeah, that's been taken, thank you.
Because once we stop, you can't do it again.
Okay, great. Yeah, so just your closing remarks for us, Shaun, please.
Look, my closing remarks are this. You're looking at a man who was born and raised in London. I've been homeless, I've been unemployed in London, but London gave me the opportunity to come back from that to build a life. I have children, I have a wife, I'm living a full life in London. That's what I want to provide for you. When I tell you London needs a fresh start, I'm sure you'll agree. Young people in London have suffered a lot from broken promises and unfulfilled potential. So when people come and promise you things that sound great, where they sound like they're on your side, I challenge you to test them. I challenge you to look at their past record. Because for me, being honest with young people about what we can do and what we can achieve together is a far better way of helping young people out. I truly, truly believe London's best days are ahead of it, because you have young people like you who are excited, who are pushing forward, who are full of innovation, and who are hungry to have a full and a fulfilled life. I see it as my job to support you to do that. So when I tell you I'll build 100,000 homes, £100,000, I'm serious. When I tell you that I'll make the streets of London safe within 100 days, I'm serious. When I tell you I'll bring young people to the table to help make those decisions, I have a track record of doing so. Remember, you are London's future. We need you to succeed. I need you to succeed. And the way in which I help you succeed is by giving London a fresh start.
Thank you once again for joining us, Shaun, and for all the young people as well.
Pleasure.
Joining us. Yeah,
Absolute pleasure. I'll come back anytime.
And just also a big thanks to our sponsor again, Letter One, for this session. And just a reminder that the election is happening Thursday, the 6th of May, and that Shaun is one of 20 candidates running for the election. You can find the full list of candidates online. And as mentioned, we are also running sessions with all the other candidates this week. You can sign up for them via the form in the chat panel. Thank you, everyone, and have a lovely evening.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, Shaun. It was nice meeting you.
And you as well. Thank you.
Thank you.